as well. I was going to open something. Yeah, that bit there.
Well, I can't read that. What is
I
it?
don't know, it's just people joining.
Oh, right. There.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Weird Wednesdays, my new Instagram live with some wonderful people who are intrinsically entwined in health and getting to root causes. Today I'm joined by a very good friend and legend in the industry, Jerome Burne, who's a medical journalist, has spent many years writing for big publications, uncovering information in science, in medical science, as well as preventative health. Today we are going to talk about social prescribing, which is something that you may not have heard of and isn't very widely publicised either. Jerome, can you just give us the definition of social prescribing?
Okay. The big idea that we have at the moment in the medical system is that you find out what is wrong with people, you know, what the diagnosis is, diabetes, heart disease, whatever, and then you give them a pill, and that's the basic model. The drawback with that model is that it doesn't cover an awful lot of the things which actually make people ill, because the pills aren't going to stop that, and you've got things like stress, poor relationships, lack of exercise, poor sleep, conditions surrounding you which are just more likely to make you ill, and they won't do anything about it at all. So we were completely dominated by this drug model. And what's been happening lately is that a number of interesting people in the NHS have been saying, actually, we're giving people far too many pills. And we need to shift that so we have a wider range of option for the GPs. And the model that they've come up with is something called social prescribing, which means that instead of being given a pill, you're sent to talk to somebody in your area, providing they've set up the system properly.
And is that something that is in, well, you just answered the question, but is that something in all GP practices, or only very few? What are the statistics on?
I don't know exactly how many systems are, but in order for it to work, you have to put money, essentially NHS has to put money into setting up a system within a community or within a town.
Right.
And at the centre of it is somebody called a link worker.
Right.
And this is a charming, probably a bit older, sophisticated, kindly person who you go along to and say, I've been feeling really shit recently, and I've broken up with my wife, and I really can't get much energy going, and so on. And they say, well, what do you feel you need? And one of the big mantras of it is not what's wrong, what is it that's trouble for you, but what is it that you need is the big question, so that then people become the ones who are building their own recovery rather than being told what to do.
So there are lots of, we used to have, we still have book club.
Yeah.
Book club wasn't part of social prescribing, but we all felt like we needed to come together and do something as a community.
Sure.
That's an example.
Yeah.
And in lockdown, we all got our 10,000 steps in every day.
Yeah.
Nobody got off the sofa before lockdown. And now we're all walking. But that has been recognised as an NHS prescription rather than getting an antidepressant.
Exactly.
The doctors are now saying, go and have a walk.
Well, one of the biggest causes of heart disease is loneliness.
Right.
And so what a lot of the social prescribing is, it's things like join a club, book club, go for walks, group walks, go to a library, go to classes. All of those sort of things will be put forward as something that can help. And in areas where it's been tried out, it's impressively successful. I mean, the first sort of big study was in Frome in where is it? In the
Somerset.
In Somerset. And they put a proportion of the population onto a social prescribing, that was being made available via their GP, and the GP would refer them to this link worker who'd say, well, I think you might do well on Wednesdays walks, or maybe spent some time learning how to cook. If that's
bit of crochet.
All that stuff. And what happened was that they ran it for about 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, the number of people going to hospital from Frome had dropped by 20%, and the number of people in the surrounding towns had stayed the same or had actually gone up. So there was definitely an effect on how often people were ill or how serious it was.
Because one of the things that differentiates, the two different models of health, whether it's pharmaceuticals and medicine and our hospitals, and then the alternative way, or allopathic medicine with all the other therapies that we do, or talking therapies, is that there isn't enough data, I suppose, if you like, for the pill pushers to be able to say, oh, well, walking worked or book club worked. Where is the hard? What are the parameters? What are the marks in the graph that we're testing so it's proven? Because also, I guess there's a lot of, whilst social prescribing definitely works for the majority of people, because yes, we have lost connection, we have lost community. Often a walk makes us feel better, I say it to my clients, or just not having your phone anymore. But there will be some people with some serious health concerns and issues where social prescribing might not want to be taken too lightly or too...
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's, although the NHS, rather surprisingly, because we sort of think of the NHS as a drug-based system, they have been putting money into it, and they have committed to it in a way that makes it odd that it's not better known, because it should be part of NHS. This is one of the things that we're hoping to get. I think it's probably because it hasn't been rolled out across the country, and there's this feeling that it should be available to everybody before they can promote it too much.
So just going back to the pills, there's a lot of sort of beyond pills. Dr. Mike Dixon has rolled out a medicine campaign called Beyond Pills, and when you look at all the statistics on the drugs that are being used in the NHS, I read that there was a statistic that over the 65-year-old age group, 50% didn't take the medication, which equates to something like £8.9 billion.
Yes, not taking drugs is one thing. The rate at which people are taking more drugs is also striking. There was, between 1996 and 2016, there was a 10% increase in the number of pills prescribed per head in the country. And a lot of these, although there's this sort of assumption, you were talking just now about the issue of evidence and how good it is and so on, vast numbers of people are given SSRIs, which is the antidepressant drugs.
Yeah.
And the data, this year there's come out yet another big study saying actually SSRIs, not only are they not very effective, they're really hard to come off, and people have huge problems with side effects. And it actually looks as though the theory behind it, which is that serotonin is this happy, feel-good chemical, and if you raise serotonin, then you're going to feel better automatically, because that's what the drug does. Actually, the link between serotonin and feeling good or changing your mood and behaviour is really not that convincing, so that there's serious doubts about how useful that underlying theory is. So there's a lot of things which are problematic with drugs. This idea that either you have drugs which are all properly tested, randomised controlled trials, good, proper scientific medicine, all this rather woolly stuff of libraries and yoga and so on, which, you know, clearly can't compete with proper medicine. It's not at all as simple as that.
Yeah.
And in fact, another thing people aren't aware of really is that when they go to see their doctor and they say, you know, doctor says, what seems to be the matter? And you say, and they say, well, I think you're depressed, or I think you've got, or they do some tests and you've got high blood pressure or diabetes and so on. And then you give them a drug, you prescribe a drug. So there was a project about 10 years ago started by Tony Blair to get doctors to be more aggressive in finding people in their area and then giving them the recommended drugs for their condition.
Local drug pushers.
Exactly, they were encouraged to do it, and they get paid for it.
Right, okay.
Which is, you know, when you're given your SSRIs or your diabetes drugs, it's not just that we think it's good for you, but the doctor has a vested interest in giving that to you.
Or a commission.
So, exactly. So you've got a situation where it's logical that if these drugs work and if they've been tested and run through the RCTs and so on, and you give them to people who are at risk, there should be a drop in the number of cases of diabetes or heart disease or whatever it is they're being treated for. When there was a trial which tried to evaluate how effective this system it was called QOF, Quality and Outcomes Framework, which doesn't mean anything at all to any normal person. And what they found was that far from there being a drop in the number of cases sort of across the country as a result of this mass prescribing, actually the number of people with problems went up. There wasn't a decline in hospital admissions, and the incidence or seriousness of various conditions didn't drop either. So QOF, in terms of, it has been a huge failure. It's a sort of the other end of social prescribing, because it was all drugs rather than the other things which can affect people. But nobody knows it. This is another one of the failure of QOF is not something that
anybody knows.
That no one knows about. Really.
We were probably diverted when the media came out with, I don't know, some breakup in a celebrity relationship or something, or maybe a bank going down.
Yeah, all of that.
But in lockdown, you know, we talk about, you know, in lockdown, a lot of, you know, GlaxoSmithKline and some big pharmaceutical companies apparently ran out of all the compounds that make up omeprazole or pansoprazole or any sort of acid reflux GERD type drug. Now, this all sort of makes sense because over lockdown, anxiety went through the roof, depression, we lost community, we were lonely, loneliness went off the Richter scale.
Big thing,
And so because of all those mental, emotional feelings that changed on a daily basis, we were overridden with them. And as a human race, or a country, let's just keep it within England, the UK, we weren't well equipped enough, a lot of people weren't well equipped enough to be able to look after themselves or be in their own company for such huge amounts of time. And so one of the things that we saw in the drug world was that the need for the antacids just went through the roof. And that's because it was all based around lifestyle. They didn't have conditions.
Right.
The drug was needed because their lifestyle changed, which was a controllable element.
Yes, yeah. Well, the other thing, of course, is that a lot of the drugs which people were being given, like metformin or the stomach acid, ones for reducing stomach acid, one of the things that they have an effect on is on the rate at which you can utilise or take up vitamins and minerals from your diet. So there's occasionally saying, well, you should be careful about taking these vitamins and so on. They could interfere with the way your drug's working. They never say, well, you're on 6 drugs now, Mrs. Jones, because that's what happens as you get older. You get, more symptoms, and so they give you more drugs to treat them. And if you've got, let's say, a condition which involves not being able to handle stress, or your nervous system isn't working very well, and you're put on drugs for reducing your stomach acid, you're not going to be able to absorb B vitamins from your food. If you go along to your doctor and say, I'm feeling a bit sort of jangly and stressy and so on, would it be worth my taking B vitamins? Your doctor would probably not know about it, and secondly would probably not advise it. And yet the reason you're having a problem is because of the drugs you're taking. So
absolutely, and actually in my practice I advise a B complex more than anything else, because it sort of mops up an array of potential issues and adds back into the environment certain reactions in the body. B6, for example, and we're all quite deficient in a lot of these Bs because we are unfortunately eating very high plant-based diets. And so, not to say that plant-based diets are bad, they just don't always look at the full picture. And B-vits, once they're diminished, you've got a whole array of mood, mental disorders or starting to creep in that could all be fixed from supplementation of Bs, magnesium, omegas, and so on.
Well, if we're talking about making minerals and vitamins, nutrients more available, the big bogey in the room of our health at the moment is, of course, Alzheimer's. Something that everybody is terrified about. And interestingly, particularly in light of the social prescribing ideas, the idea that actually Alzheimer's might be, your risk might be reduced by lifestyle and dietary changes is beginning also to come into the picture. So the sort of broad message that I'm interested in is that there does seem to be this shift from how do we treat, what should doctors be doing, not just giving out pills, but the lifestyle and so on. But the interesting thing with Alzheimer's is that it looks as though, and again, need more evidence, but it looks as though a lot of the standard health things like exercising, getting more sleep, looking after your gut bacteria, all those things have an effect on what your brain is doing, and that reduces your chance of having damage done to your brain. There are two things which have got very good evidence for benefiting the brain, and the evidence dates back to about 10 years ago, and an Oxford professor, Professor David Smith, who was a pharmacologist, he reckoned that there was a role being played in Alzheimer's of an amino acid called homocysteine, which is something that if you're not getting enough B vitamins is going to rise. And high levels of homocysteine, often found in Alzheimer's patients, is one of the things that damages brain cells. So if you've got someone who's beginning to lose things, if you give them, and this was the study that Smith did, and he didn't just do a kind of how are you feeling afterwards to somebody, he actually looked at their brains before and after with the brain scan, and so you could see the areas that had damage to them, and that had cleared up. So it was a really exciting, interesting, positive thing. Was there any publicity about it? No, there wasn't. Oxford, where it was run, and the Alzheimer's Research Society, who partly funded it, neither Oxford nor the society put out any publicity or press releases about it. Now, I am not somebody who has a hatred of pharmaceutical companies. I just think that they sometimes are not entirely honest. But it does seem to me that the huge amount of money which is sitting there for the first drug to be able to make a difference to Alzheimer's, the companies might not be very interested in promoting something which costs about 5p a go. So that's another one of those sort of lurking things that if we were to include it in our health as part of the health, I don't know exactly where the social prescribing people have got to, but certainly social prescribing does put people on non-drug, non-pharma treatments, and so they would be interested in diet and lifestyle and all those sort of things. So,
and I suppose, quite a lot of social prescribing is happening without it being under the umbrella of the NHS. I'm just sort of thinking about lots of these things that are happening since lockdown. Alcohol, for example. So there's a huge movement of not drinking alcohol. I think there's a girl set up Girls Sobriety Club, and they do dance. They do, obviously no alcohol involved in any event. Where you can go with like-minded people and have a boogie and have a rave and do yoga and do lots of other things. Not that you would drink alcohol, you'd do yoga anyway. But lots of things have actually happened in the break of lockdown to create more community, which is essentially what we're saying social prescribing is. Being funded privately or by small businesses or companies. And actually the amount of, I don't know the statistics on it, but the amount of people that are admitted to A&E at a weekend, for example, has that gone down or up since the movement of being abstinent, or has that gone up because we're still in a highly anxious and a depressed place as a human race?
Well, the part of the drive for the social prescribing being taken up by the NHS formally was that these statistics which we were talking about earlier, where they found either drugs weren't being used or that they had side effects or that they weren't being that effective, and that if you had people who got older, they were taking more and more drugs, which had a knock-on effect. But so that now it is sort of within the NHS, and the official line from the NHS is that they hope to have 900,000 link workers. These are the people who are the central figures who unlike we all know GPs are rushed off their feet, don't have any time, so they can't sit down in an old-fashioned way and say, how are you feeling, what's going on?
I'll drop over on Friday for some cake.
All of that. And these link workers have the time to do that. They can say, what do you need? And there's a sort of phrase about, the doctor will say, what's the matter? And the link worker will say, well, what matters to you?
Yes, I read that. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, so a really nice sort of summary of it.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's kind of hidden within the NHS massive bureaucracy and covered up by all the problems with striking doctors and striking nurses and all of that kind of problem, funding and the rest of it. But bubbling away underneath it is this commitment to have large numbers of link workers, things set up in all the major centres. 60% of the population have got chronic metabolic disorders.
Well, yes, I was just reading that. I'm just going to interrupt you slightly, Jerome, because guys, you can ask questions, and there are some coming through. So do please ask while we've got this knowledge here with us. Good Thinking TV. What was the last thing he mentioned? I think that was the bit when he was talking about everything was about Alzheimer's and the preventative measures, certainly with B vitamins. Tell me if that was right and that makes sense to you. Then we've got Anita Burke. What are your thoughts on HRT? We'll come to that for you. Anita, again, I drink lemon and ginger in the morning. This has helped with my acid reflux. Well, I think that with acid reflux, which is something I do a lot of with people, the moment you put in one new change, the moment you start one new change and be consistent about it, whether your acid reflux is there because of anxiety, being overweight, but not sleeping well, or it's a mechanical issue with the lower esophageal sphincter, once you make a change, then it's sort of a bit like dominoes. So what works for one might not work for another, but if it works for you, then just keep doing it. Absolutely, well done. Just checking anything else. Guys, do ask any questions if you have. Good, thanks, Anita. Okay. So, I want to be a link worker.
Be brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
We could have,
You could give
gut
people
health link.
and cold showers. I know that.
I could just shower everyone. It's a fascinating area. It's a fascinating area because it feels like the NHS is, you know, the money that they spend. I mean, I know this research because I'm writing about it on constipation alone. The amount of money it costs the NHS to deal with one symptom. Constipation isn't a diagnosis, it's a symptom of a inefficient or malfunctioning digestive system.
Yes.
And it costs them billions. Alzheimer's, I mean anything, and the drugs aren't working. We've just heard that 50% of people don't take their medications, which is up into the billions. More and more people are being prescribed up to 5 medications, and we know, or certainly with supplements, the consistency of a person taking more than 3 supplements or a medication automatically goes down. So all the then variables or the contra interactions with the drugs change because you're not actually on the protocol that you should be on because you've forgotten to take 2 major things that are interacting with all the other things. So the NHS are getting to this place, it sounds like, that the drugs aren't working. Skills, not pills, as one of the doctors says.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Unwin, maybe, no, someone else. Skills, not pills. And before all the pills were there, we had community, you know. My Italian clients are always like, oh, the doctors in the UK are dreadful, but in Italy, they're still on your phone, they call you up, they come for dinner. There's still a community, and I'm sure that's not true of everywhere, but it feels like we're coming back to this place of, let me hold your hand, let me look in your eye and ask you, how do you feel? I mean, just that, how do you feel? It's got to be a better prescription than take these 3 times a day whilst not looking in your eye because I've only got 7 minutes and I've got to go. And again, we're not dissing the NHS. I think they're an absolutely fabulous, most incredible, crucial organisation and save lives. They are, without a doubt, essential. But the burden on it is got to be somewhere that we as communities can start taking responsibility for. And maybe, guys, today go and look at some community outlets in your area. How can you get involved? How can you use your skills to create a group where even if you touch the lives of 1 or 2 people in your building block, in your village, in your street, even if you help get 2 people out of the house every day or every week, then you are making a considerable difference.
And if you know, you wanted to do it in a sort of organised way, because like all these things, it's, you know, you could do some things which might benefit your area, but it might be useful the other way of looking at what the NHS, how they're talking about it and what they're planning to do. And if you go on, if you do a search, you know, social prescribing, NHS, reams of stuff will come up on the groups that are doing it and what how they're trying to roll it out, because there is a plan to roll it out across the country. So it should be coming, but there's been an awful lot of distractions from it.
Just as a show of hands, can you put a thumbs up in the box if you're still listening, if you've heard of social prescribing, or a thumbs down if you haven't. I just think it's interesting because it feels like it's a really good marketing campaign. It feels like it's really social media worthy and excellent, and yet everyone I speak to about it has never heard of it, apart from, oh yeah, walking's a bit of a prescription these days. Which it still is, except none of us are doing it anymore.
One of the problems that people have who are trying to push it is resistance from doctors, you know, because for doctors they're not trained in nutrition, they're not trained in any, the training is to pretty well be sceptical of any non-drug things, certainly dietary things or acupuncture or you know, all of those things which are not mainstream. And the constant thing is where's the evidence? But when you turn the mirror around and say, well, how's your drug evidence doing?
Yeah.
The answer is not that well.
We need a bit more funding.
Yes, exactly.
And you know what's also interesting to look at it, just how it can be such an easy decline into ill health or a mood disorder. You know, speaking to Ben last week, who is an osteopath and kung fu master, you know, he was talking about how it's all about the flow in the body, and you can have an injury in the body or a shoulder that doesn't move, or you know, your movement can be limited, and just from that can create a plethora of issues that come from a physical body not moving as well. Suddenly you can't get something off the shelf, you stop going to the gym, your world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And as your world becomes smaller and smaller, and the TV becomes your only outlet, the pills start being a saviour to the conditions that you've then created yourself. And really what we need to be having this picture of are these community groups where movement is so vitally as important as a pill. In fact, I'd say movement is more important and more productive.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a cliche really, but if you could sort of bottle exercise, it would be fantastic. If I can just do a quick plug.
Go for it.
For an organisation that I think is doing really good stuff.
Yeah.
Is called Food for the Brain. And it's nutrition and lifestyle, and it's aimed at offering people a sort of package for dealing with Alzheimer's risk and trying to help people who are maybe on the road, as it were, who are beginning to have problems. And what it does is that they first of all have a test, which is a fairly standard one. You know, how are you doing? What can you do? Are you showing signs of decline? And then they have another thing, which is what are you doing in your life? What are you eating? How are your guts? How's your heart condition and so on? So that there are these areas, all of which, not surprisingly, feed into the brain, because you know the brain is a central command post, as it were, and everything has a two-way link with the brain. So if you've got problems in your kidneys or your guts or your blood pressure, your lungs, it's going to affect areas in the brain as well. And so what they're doing is they talk about the terrain, which is the air and what's going on in your body, and strengthening that. And they've divided it down into about 7 or 8 areas that you need to be taking care of, so that as a result of doing the questionnaire, and they'll give you a report and say, well, you seem to be pretty good on your guts and your cardiovascular, but you could do more with sleep and exercise and so on. So they give you a sort of report, and then you have an app called Cognition, where they chase you up and say, you know, how are you doing? How much have you done on this and so on.
Yeah.
So it's a real, you know, two-way thing, and it's the kind of thing that could easily be adapted to social prescribing, for example. I mean, I don't think the NHS has quite got onto it yet, but
I'm not sure they've got a fairly good track record in apps, have they, either?
There've been lots of problems with that.
I think if they decided to bring out another app,
but I mean, you know, so that there are these green shoots, as it were, of new initiatives that are going on, saying let's see if we can get this other side of medicine working, which I think is amazing.
And actually, what's nice this time round with the social prescribing is that it's obviously stemming from the NHS. It's stemming from a place where they are saying what we are doing is not working. It's not working financially, it's not working health-wise. In fact, it's doing the complete opposite of what we expected it to do. And often in life, we have to go back to the roots. We have to go back to ancient wisdom. We have to go back to the basics. And we miss the basics because, you know, maybe we've got a bit lazy and a bit, reliant upon popping a pill when we have a headache. Who takes a pill for...
And the other side of it, I mean, although I, like a lot of people, have doubts and worries about AI, AI seems to me to be a perfect thing to try to untangle some of these incredibly complicated things about what are the drugs doing, what are the vitamins and minerals doing, what's the diet doing, and how all these factors pile in. And there's no way it can be figured out by our standard RCTs. They're not going to do that at all.
Just ask GTP chat. I mean, it is incredible. Guys, I'm going to put a link for food for thought on the post that I do on this video.
That's food for the brain.
Sorry, what did I say? Food for thought. Well, I'm hungry. Food for the brain, and a link to Jerome's website where you can read his articles. If you want any information, do DM me. I'm sure I will be having Jerome back on because there's just so much to chat about. We might need to do an evening with Jerome over a few drinks and canapes.
Yes, would like a drink or two rather than all have to be orange juice or kefir.
Well, actually, I will say on brain information, I have recently, I haven't got your disclosure on this. Can I share how healthy you are with the audience?
Fine.
So I did an inflammation test with Jerome, and he's actually topped the charts of all my clients. I mean, I would say that Jerome is definitely a client, but his results are off the scale. And that is down to being consistent, you know, in everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I have been doing B vitamins and omegas and magnesium, and I try not to be too, precious about it, but bit of exercise. And Hannah was very helpful for sorting out my gym work and what I could be doing with weights and things like that. So that was that. Yeah. So it does take attention, but I think we all pick on things that we pay attention to. I pay no attention to personal finance because I get sort of lost on pensions and money and those things. But fortunately I have a wife who's terribly good at that, so I keep her healthy and she looks after my financial health. So
and that's how it works, isn't it? That's how it works. So, and actually, sorry, the last thing on the social prescribing is that wasn't there something over lockdown that some of these link workers were providing financial advice to people, and that was one of the most uptaken groups.
Yeah.
And that reduced a huge amount of worry, anxiety, depression and problems because they had free access to talking to somebody about money.
But of course there were some people involved in the NHS who looked at this absurd idea that you might sort of give people finance. What on earth that got to do with health? I mean, and the link between it was just fantastically obvious that stress and anxiety over money are huge. In terms of the standard medical thinking, that's not where it goes to, but could make a big difference.
Guys, sorry to call you guys all the time. It's 1:40. Go and grab some lunch. Thanks so much for joining and supporting Weird Wednesdays. If you want to hear about more incredible people and what they're doing and what they know, then do spread the word. I'm going to be here at 1 o'clock every Wednesday talking to some super brains and very interesting people, and no doubt we'll have Jerome back on again. In the meantime, DM me if you've got any questions. I'll link you up with Jerome, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.